right. Well, happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to another weekly update, future focused weekly update, keeping you current on some of the latest happenings at the intersection of business, tech, and human experience. Like the past few weeks, I am not going to list off all the things I have on my agenda because I'm going to watch the time and just make sure I don't go too long on these. So we'll see how many of them I get through. But thanks again for tuning in. And if you have not already, I'm going to continue to plug this. Please feel free to go out and give this a review, a rating. Always helps other people find this. And if you're not subscribed to my Substack, feel free to check that out. I post a weekly kind of reflections article on some of the biggest things on the top of my mind. So with that, enough about that. I've got a few things to cut through. Some are a little more serious than others. So we'll see. We'll see how heavy this conversation is, but I'm looking forward to it. So the first one was something I've been watching. It's been something I've been kind of following over the last couple of months, this trend of AI influencers. Now, to be clear, I am not talking about thought leaders who talk about artificial intelligence. So just so we're clear on this, when I'm talking about AI influencers, that I don't mean people who are specialized in this field and have a lot of experience and are just sharing wisdom and thoughts on kind of where things are going. I am legitimately talking, and if you didn't know this is a thing, just Google this. It's kind of nuts. But there is this growing trend on Instagram and other social platforms of bots that are influencers, and they're just kind of I guess in the most general sense of the term, they're just people, and it's video content. So this isn't like a chat bot. This is literally AI generated video of AI generated people talking about whatever. And again, it's influencer marketing. So if you know anything about influencer marketing, it's people who have a lot of followers talking about whatever's going on in their life or whatever, and then telling you why you need to buy the sunglasses they're wearing because they're the greatest sunglasses ever, or, go sign up for XYZ mobile app because it'll save you thousands of dollars, whatever. Anyway, the point is, I've been watching this for the last few months, and it really started to rise as generative AI's video and audio capability really started to mature. And now the fact that we can create realistic videos of people doing normal things that, you don't see somebody with like a weird deformed hand or something like that. You're like, what is that? And it looks so realistic, you wouldn't be able to tell. It doesn't surprise me that people are doing this. The part that is a little interesting about it is, as I've been digging into some of this, what I don't know is if the people who are following this would be something that I would ask out to those of you who are watching or listening this. If you are someone who follows an AI generated influencer, I'm actually genuinely curious why. And that's what I'm really curious about. Is it that people don't know that these are AI generated things? Is it that they do know, but they're really curious and they're kind of following, like, is this even going to feel realistic? Is it that, like so much of marketing, it can kind of cater to the things that grab people's attention without all the hassle of having to make real people do this kind of stuff? And so at the end, people aren't really watching or following this content because they're really interested in the content, but more just kind of what's being discussed or what they're watching on the screen type of a thing, kind of a creepy factor. But it is just one of these very strange things that I watch and go, what really is going on with this? Now, at the same time, because I have heard arguments on this and some people get really, really feisty about this, like this is a brand new thing. I don't know that I would actually say this isn't new. And this goes back to people who follow me know I talk a lot about kind of the ecclesiastical wisdom that nothing is really new under the sun. And so, ghostwriters, that's been around for a long time. If you have never followed like Twitch or gaming channels, there's lots of really, really famous gamers who nobody's actually ever seen their face. They don't use a webcam. They have kind of a cartoon icon that is their image, and that's just what they're known. If you want to know the names of some of them, you can look up Dream or Technoblade or some of these others. Skeppy, I think, is another one. There's some of these other ones and it's a big deal when people finally see them. You can look up like Dream face reveal on YouTube and you'll see it's like a huge deal when all of a sudden these people who have been behind the screen forever now come out and it's like that's who they are. We had no idea who they are. I think what's really interesting about this, though, is the fact that do people not know, or do they know? And is it something where this is kind of becoming like, because I can see this being used in not so nefarious ways. I'll be the first to say I know lots of people, and it took me a long time to get comfortable being on camera and kind of being out there and people knew who I was type of a thing. And so I can see there being some value to creating an AI version of something that's what people see and they're following, but really they know that there's someone behind that mask, if you will, that you're really following the thoughts and the ideas and what this person has to say about these things. And so then if you're using AI to kind of help make it more engaging, but it's really just a mask that you're putting on so that you can get over maybe some of your own insecurities about putting yourself out there, I can kind of see where that would fit in. And to me, that's not all that different than a Twitch gamer that doesn't turn on a face cam and you just really only ever hear their voice. And even sometimes they do voice modulation, so you don't even really know what their voice is until they do these big reveals. So I actually can see where some of this comes from, but I really think it comes back to this whole, one of the things that brought to mind for me was some of the research that has come out that one of the number one things that the younger generations want to be when they grow up is an influencer. And I think this whole movement towards AI is now coming for influencers going, well, hey, if you're just a face with not really a whole lot to say, but you can get people to buy your product for whatever reason, we'll just make an AI version of that. And then we cut you out of the loop and save a bunch of money. I think it does get to the root of like, well, what are you really trying to do as an influencer? Because if your goal is just to make a boatload of cash and have a bunch of people tell you how amazing you are, that's not a terribly fulfilling pursuit. And I know a lot of influencers who have said they're actually really miserable being an influencer because it's very lonely and they feel like their only goal is just to keep the audience that they've acquired happy, and they in many ways have lost themselves. And so when I think about that, that's a pretty miserable existence. And so now when you look at that and you go, well, if you're going into being an influencer just to appease an audience and make a bunch of money and do all these things, you are going to be very vulnerable to be disrupted by AI because, well, there's really nothing behind that. And AI can stand that up and mock it up. And pretty soon your job is at risk. But really, what are you losing? And so it's just an interesting trend to watch. But again, I would be really curious if there are people out there who watch and listen to this who they follow AI influencers, and I would just be really curious as to why and what that's doing. And really, I've had some conversations with people who I actually talked to somebody recently who they discovered one of the people they were following was an AI influencer. And the reaction was very similar. If you go back, I think it was a couple months where I did one on when Sports Illustrated, it came out that they had fake AI people writing articles, but presenting it as though it was a real person. The backlash on it was pretty brutal. And this person I was talking to, like when they found out this influencer was some unnamed person that was just feeding this AI video bot, stuff to lure them in to sell them whatever crap, it actually completely turned their attitude towards things. So yeah, it's an interesting space and an interesting use case for artificial intelligence. And I have no doubt it's going to rise. It's going to grow. Companies need popular people. And I guarantee there's going to be a career where people build AI influencers and then sell the services of their influencers. And then they don't have to deal with the actual influencer themselves. So it's just amazing the way the market moves and where we go. But I'm actually really curious the response from people as they start recognizing some of this, and will they really care? Will they not? Will it hopefully maybe change people's aspirations because, or at least asking the question, why do you want to be an influencer in the first place? Which I think is something everybody should be asking if that's really what you want to do. Okay. Transitioning over to the next one. So the next one was these articles. This one was shared to me by a couple different people. They were curious what my reaction was. Can't remember. I think it was Business Insider had a number of articles that came out, or one article, and then of course you got all the other ones. But it was talking about people are starting to make these demands. Employees are starting to make these demands, saying we will return to the office if you as an organization will pay the expenses of our commute. So if you really want us in the office, then fine, but then you need to pay for the commute. And I think my response may surprise some people who have followed me for a while, in that I don't necessarily know that even though I think it's ridiculous, if you listen to my stuff, I'm not a big fan of companies demanding that people come back into the office for words like innovation and collaboration and, whatever ethereal things that companies will use to justify forcing people who have been working remotely to come in for some arbitrary purpose. So I'm not a fan of that at all, to be clear. So if you're new to my stuff, you should know I absolutely abhor the fact that companies are doing this. And I think it's dehumanizing on so many levels. At the same time, I don't know that demanding that a company pay you to come into the office, I get it's kind of that reactionary response of, fine, you want me to come in? I will, and then I'm going to expect that you pay me. I don't know that that really gets us where we want to go in the first place, because now you're turning this into just this transactional relationship where it's like, I'll only do things if you pay me to do it. And I can tell you right now, that's going to start going south in some other direction. Like, even if companies decide, fine, we'll pay you to commute, then it's going to turn into, well, now basically we're paying you for this thing, so now we're going to layer other expectations. The snowball starts rolling down a hill in a way that I don't see. First of all, I don't think very many companies are going to do this unless they truly are desperate to get people into the office. But what's been interesting to see is companies say they're desperate to get people into the office, yet they aren't really willing to put any money or support or justifiable reasons behind it. So to think that a company who says we want you in the office because we think it's super important, one thing I think it will start to reveal is they don't think it's that important. Like, it's really important, not important enough to pay people to do it. But I just really don't see this being a reasonable solution to do it, because if ultimately, and I think as a business, if you're a business leader and you're considering this, I actually don't think it's necessarily a wise move. I would actually challenge you to go, why are we forcing people to come into an office? Because the thing is, if you start paying people to come into an office, first of all, you're starting to create a culture of this just like transactional, like, I only do things if I'm paid to do it. And that's not how high performing companies work. You unite around what you're trying to accomplish and you work together to pull this off. You don't go, well, I'm fee for service, and so absolutely everything I do, I'm going to just nickel and dime you, because you're opening yourself up to all sorts of other things where, like, then what? People are going to start asking for other stuff. So I don't know that this is a path. If you're a business, even if you're going, we desperately want people to come into the office, I don't think trying to incentivize people to do this, you're going to get people who hate being there, but they want the extra money. So they're not going to quit, but they'll take the paycheck. And then they're just going to come to the office and be just as disengaged as they were, because they're going to go, this is so stupid, but I'm not going to stop doing it because I'm getting paid to do it. It just doesn't really make sense to me. And to the people who are on the commuter side going, well, they're making me do it, and so they should at least compensate me for it. I actually would say, look for a company that actually appreciates the value you bring and doesn't see where you do your work as the top priority for them. I think you will be much more satisfied working for a company who actually sees the value that you bring, is willing to work with you and meet you where you are in a really healthy way, and put the time and energy into that and moving on to that. Because quite frankly, are there some companies who say this is just who we are and this is where we stand? As much as I disagree with it, I actually respect it. I respect the fact that it's like, okay, fine, but then do the right thing and make that super clear for people. Don't play games. Be kind and generous as people, make their decisions, and don't act like you're not doing what you're doing as you're going through this path. Like, just own it. Just own the fact we firmly believe this. This is who we are as a company, and we recognize this is probably limiting our talent pool. We know all the reasons people tell us this is a bad idea, but we have chosen that we're going to do it and we're going to stick to it. And whatever. I don't agree with that. Just to be clear, I think that's a huge mistake. So if you just heard that whole rant and go, there, Christopher's supporting it, I actually don't. I think you will regret that in the long run. But I have much more respect for someone who will do that and then respectfully makes that clear, doesn't even open conversations to people for flexible working, says, nope, not what we do. That's not how we run things. This is how we operate. These are the lines. We're super clear on it. We don't apologize for it. This is just how it is. I have more respect for people that do that than when they go, no, we really care about employees and we care about outcomes and we care about meeting you where you are. But really, the way we operate is the exact opposite of that. At least be consistent. And so that's my take on this. I know this is kind of now becoming a rising trend based on some of this stuff. I just don't think it gets us to a better place. I think it actually just creates more problems than it solves. And it's just going to create more problems down the road in different ways. It's going to have an effect on culture. You're going to run into liability stuff because you're going to have policies around, well, how far and how much, and what if this person does this? And ultimately, it's not addressing the problem that people are really trying to do. And I think that's my biggest frustration when I hear this one is it's just another distraction. It's another piece of noise distracting us from the real problem that's going on. And I would just say to individuals or organizations, deal with the root problem and put your time and energy into fixing that. Don't stand up these Band-Aid solutions where you're sticking your hole in the Hoover Dam and going, because you're just going to blow a hole somewhere else and you're going to have to figure that out. And you only got so many fingers. So that's my reaction to this. And again, it might have surprised some people who thought I would have been like, yeah, if people are going to make them commute into the office, the least you can do is pay them. I'd be like, nah, I actually would shut that down real quick and just say, let's make some tough decisions and do it the right way and go through the hard work of actually ironing this out. Let's not stand up temporary placeholders that are just going to cause more problems for us in the long run. All right. That one was another interesting one. Another one that came up, I can't remember if it was this week or last week, but Elon Musk, Tesla, came out saying robotaxis are coming in August. They will be here. We're going to have fully autonomous vehicles. So we're talking vehicles. I was digging into some of this of like, what is the, vision of this? Vehicles with no driving accessories, so no steering wheel, no gas, no anything, like just little pods, Jetsons things, driving around the roads, picking people up, taking them wherever they want to go, all of this stuff by August. And, it was funny because analysts just went bonkers over this a little bit, going, we've seen the tech, and I've seen the tech. I've seen some of this stuff. I've talked to people who are much closer to it than I am about its maturity, its readiness. I'm like, August? I mean, I'm all about, we put a flag out there. And even just last week, I said this from some of these innovations and tech things. Like, we put a flag out there and we're like, this is where it's going to be. And then we're always surprised it's a little bit or a lot bit closer than where we put the flag. This is not one where I'm like, August, probably more like June. And I'll eat my own words. I don't know that I'm at a point where I'm willing to put money or anything like this on this. Maybe I'll do a contest and I'll send my listeners or something. I have no idea what I'd send them. But anyway, if I'm wrong, So hold me to this. Somebody write it down, write Christopher's prediction on this. And if I'm wrong, you can message me back and say, Christopher, you were completely wrong on this. What are you going to do about it? I would say I'd shave my head, but that wouldn't even be a big deal. Anyway, I'm totally sidetracked now. But my point is, all the analysts are looking at this. Most of the people I know in the tech space are like, the tech itself is not even ready for full autonomy, let alone our infrastructure and just societal readiness. And there's just a lot of this stuff. Now, interestingly, I posted a short about automated pilots, AI pilots coming up. And I was surprised by kind of some of the response where some people were like, what? I'd be fine with it. I wouldn't care. And others were like, no way, wouldn't get on the plane, type of a thing. So I think it shows where society is. And I think we are warming up to the idea of things being completely autonomous. But I still think, especially the way it was described, where there's just like, there's no way for a human to oversee some of this stuff. I think we're still a ways from people feeling totally comfortable with this, especially given the fact the tech is not there. I mean, I was looking into just some examples where this stuff has fallen apart, and there are lots of them. Just YouTube autonomous car fails. And you'll see some of this stuff where there's like traffic jams where all these cars AI glitches and they all just like go to one location. There's traffic jams. There's an example of somebody who got like hit and then just dragged because the AI didn't detect that they had snagged this person. Now, that said, I'm a little bit cautious about getting too much like on, oh, here's all these examples of why it'll never work. Because the thing is humans, if we were to compare the data, and I don't like when people do this, where they'll just look at one thing and say, see, here's all the reasons this will never work. And it's like, right, but you got to baseline it against something. Human drivers are not that great. So if you look at the accident rates, the death rates, you look at some of these tragedies that happen with humans behind the wheels, in many ways, my personal take on this is I actually think AI would likely be safer than people. Not 100%, but I think in many cases, people may be the safer, or the AI may be the safer route for something as when you think about driving, it's largely robotic. You have a destination, you need to get somewhere, and it is so much better just sit and get there. And I know that it's one thing if you're a car enthusiast and if you're driving your favorite car, you got your convertible with it. Like there's experiential components of driving, but the large majority of driving is just robotic. And so I personally think when we think about some of the risks, and if we were to compare AI accidents and things like this, I think we would find that AI actually does a pretty good job. What it doesn't handle well is exceptions. And I think that's where I get a little concerned about fully autonomous vehicles. You know, if you're thinking about your average drive, back in the days when I used to commute, 99 out of 100 of my commutes were completely uneventful, took the same roads. I mean, there were even times where like I probably just spaced out and didn't even realize what was in. I'm like, oh, I'm home. I didn't even remember the drive, type of a thing. So that's the majority, but it's these exceptions of like, well, what happens when things go sideways or there's an unexpected error that goes into the mix? And that is one thing AI does not handle very well. And I think it just come back to this, how frequently is that and how comfortable? And that's where like the total autonomous, where you don't even have the option to take over and say, you know what, the weather today is really messed up and drivers are driving exceptionally crazy. I'm not going to get in the car and just trust that AI's got this under control. At least if I'm going to get in an accident, I want it to be something that I can at least take responsibility for versus kind of being completely at the helm of whatever it is. Now, granted, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where this goes, but it's funny because Musk openly acknowledges that he doesn't have a great track record of his predictions being off, or he has a great track record of his predictions being crazily off. So I don't think I'm going to lose any money or have to shave any hair by saying I don't think we're going to see fully autonomous robotaxis in August, but I know there's a lot of movement towards this. I think we've got a ways to go. Now, I don't have a Tesla. I don't know anybody directly in my sphere. I do know some people. I guess I've never asked them if they have the fully autonomous driving version of it. I mean, I've seen it do some pretty cool stuff. So I definitely think there's a place for it. But they've been saying truckers were going to be automated a long time ago, and we're still there. I've seen some of these AI trucks and they still have drivers behind the wheel. And I think, if anything, I just see the role changing. Might use have one driver. One thing that I thought was really interesting, that I was researching AI truck driving, and there's like the lead truck that is manned or womaned, whatever, personed. It's personed, and it's leading it. It's assisted by AI, but then there's a couple other AI trucks behind it. And so this front truck is kind of like now able to drive multiple trucks where they couldn't before, type of a thing. It's a little less mentally and emotion or physically draining because you aren't necessarily 100% in control. You're there more for oversight. So I think it's going to be very disruptive. I just don't think we're going to see this by August, but keep me posted. Keep me honest if I'm wrong. And all of a sudden we've got AI taxis zooming around. Feel free to send me a message and I'll come up with some creative thing that I'll do for those of you who actually remembered that I said this in April. Next up, this one kind of ties to the AI thing. That is was a little bit interesting. So I came across, I think this one I came across myself, and then somebody else mentioned it on a catch-up call I was having. But Larry Summers, who is an OpenAI board member, came out, and you can look this up on, I think there's a couple big news streams that have this article, but then there's that you have to pay for, but then there's also some free ones where you can find it. So anyway, Larry Summers, he's an OpenAI board member. He's an economist. And he is on the record now saying that AI will end all forms of human labor. That's a bold statement. I mean, all forms. He was clear on this. AI will end all forms of human labor. Now, couple things I will add for people who may hear this and go, oh my goodness, here we go. I will, like I typically do, bring a more balanced perspective to this, because I don't even think saying things like it will end all forms of human labor is helpful. Do I think, here's Christopher Lind. What Christopher Lind would go on the record saying is, I believe AI will disrupt all forms of human labor. I think that's a more helpful way of thinking about this, in that it will absolutely disrupt every form of human labor in some capacity. That, I think, is accurate. I think Larry's statement of it's going to end all forms of human labor, just, it doesn't help. But I think what he's getting at, but anyway, so let me get into this a little further. I did go deeper into some of his comments, and he was careful in how he said this. He didn't come out and say, like Elon, he wasn't like, by August, all form of labor will be gone. Instead, it was more like, it's going to happen. It's an inevitability, but it's going to take some time. And he, interestingly, referenced autonomous vehicles as one of these examples, types of things, which I don't even agree with him on that I think AI will completely eliminate human labor in even human vehicles, type of a thing. But again, he's saying now, and this is where he didn't give a date or anything like this, which I don't like these kind of predictions, because you're going to cast that thing out there. And what in 2,000 years, in 10,000 years, like, what does that even mean? All forms of human labor? Well, what if we get hit by a meteor next year and the whole planet vaporize? Like, it's just not, I don't think it's very helpful. And so I was digging into some of this a little bit more. And so I thought I'd add some color to this, because again, I don't think it's helpful. I think what he's getting at, though, and I think this is one of the rising concerns that is coming up, that another doctor that I have been following, Dr. Srinivas, I'm reading my notes, but I'm trying to even remember. I can't even pronounce it. So here I'm reading it, I can't pronounce it. Srinivas Mukamala, Dr. Mukamala. He's a notable person in the field, and he was talking about his concern. And I think this is what Larry is getting at. So let's move away from this idea that, the robots are going to eliminate all of human labor. I don't think that's helpful. And I actually don't think it's accurate. And let me first say why I don't think that's accurate. I think it's a very narrow way of thinking about people. And I also think it completely ignores human history. So I think it's very narrow in the sense that it assumes, I don't think he would say this, but in many ways, by saying it's going to eliminate all forms of human labor, you're kind of saying, I actually know what all labor could be at any point in the future. And we don't. If you were to talk to somebody 100 years ago, they could have said machines are going to replace all human labor. And even a lot of the things it did replace, you'd be like, yeah, but we just came up with new work. Like it just created new things that people needed to do. So to say it's going to eliminate all human labor presumes you know what all human labor will be in the future, and that AI will have the capability to do it. And we won't just think of new things or create new space for us to work. And again, this goes back to an analogy I use a lot where I say, a lot of people, when they think about AI taking from us, they just think about the box we're in today. And so they look at what AI is doing and they say, and you can't see me doing this if you're not watching it, but I'm making a little gesture that there's a box. And so when people say AI is taking from us, it assumes that this box is static. And it assumes that there's only so much space in this box. And so as AI takes on more of this, there's less room. And so the human side just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think that's it's a poor comparison because, first of all, history teaches us otherwise. And just in many ways, logical thinking shows us otherwise, that box is not static. That box is dynamic and it continues to expand and shrink and move and evolve, and all these other things happen. And so is AI going to take up certain components of things? Is it going to eat away? Is it going to erode this? Is this no longer going to be relevant? Well, of course it is. But that's natural. And then to assume that, well, and I actually know everywhere that box could go and what it could expand to, and I already know AI can do that. Gosh, I follow and talk to enough AI experts that will openly acknowledge that they're like, we don't know what this thing can do. We're still learning. We're still discovering. There's things we think for sure it'll do that it can't do. There's things we think it can't do that suddenly it can. There's just so much unknown in this. So I think that's where I would say, will it eliminate all things? I absolutely don't think it will. And I don't think it's helpful to say that. And it's very arrogant to say that because, again, it presumes you already know everything that will and could be in the future. And you don't. You don't. Nobody does. So with that, well, somebody does, but they're not walking around on Earth. So that's where I would say, will it disrupt it? Yes, absolutely. And so I think what Larry's getting at, and I think this is what this part of the article is hitting on more, that we need to be really conscientious of. But hang on, I know I'm jumping back, and this will be quick, I promise. I'm jumping back to this one thing. The one thing that somebody critiqued and commented on that I think is just a perfect example of this. Like, AI can substitute for a doctor making a diagnosis, but it can't substitute the nurse who's there holding the patient's hand and guiding them through that. And I think this is one of these things are far more complex than we realize. And so when we make these bold, fear-driven statements of AI is just going to eliminate the need for us, I just don't think it's helpful. Now, let me transition now, and this time I really will transition and won't go back, is what he's getting at that I do agree with, and I think is reason for serious concern, is he is acknowledging that there is going to be, and he's an economist, so yeah, he's pretty well qualified to say this. It is going to cause economic disruption at a speed and at a level that I would say societally we are probably not prepared for. You know, in the past, we had decades, sometimes centuries to adapt to these changes. And what AI is doing is it is accelerating these changes at almost a breakneck pace where all of a sudden you're like, whoa, can the economy even adapt, and can society even adapt to these changes in a healthy way that doesn't just implode things? That, I think, is a legitimate economic risk, especially because we have a lot of people making decisions about this stuff who are not equipped to make decisions about these things. And so they're making decisions about, I may see this all the time, companies deciding, oh, we're going to replace all these employees with AI. And they don't even really understand what AI can do or what it's good at or what it's not good at or the risk associated with the decisions of having AI make these kind of calls and stuff like that. And so I think the speed and pace at which things are moving, one, there is some real economic risk ahead of us that we need to say, hey, whoa. And that's where I think the disruption we're going to experience can be a little unsettling, and it should be unsettling. And I hope I unsettle people enough to say you should be taking this stuff seriously, and you should be thinking about the value that you bring and how you're adapting and what you're actively doing to be involved in this change. Because if you're not, you are going to get disrupted in a negative way. I think the other thing that Dr. Mukamala brought up that Larry did not necessarily hit on, but I think is legitimately an economic concern that I fully agree with, is this, because of the pace and speed and resources required to stay on the front end of this, the bigger threat that it's creating is the divide it's creating of inequality. And Dr. Mukamala brought up the fact, and I do agree with this, that I think if we're not very careful and intentional and we don't start regulating and thinking about some of these things, we are going to create such a class divide that so many people get left behind. And maybe, yeah, human labor will continue, but only a select few of people will ever even be able to keep pace with it to benefit. And as a result, a lot of vulnerable people will get left behind and not taken care of, because chances are, if we look at human society, a lot of times when this stuff happens, the people on the front are not necessarily looking back going, hey, how do we make sure we bring everybody else along for the ride? How do we care for them? There's just this tendency to go, how do I just keep pushing farther forward and faster and faster, not realizing this, like, whoa, yo, you're leaving everybody behind. And sometimes it takes a catastrophic event for that person on the front to finally go, what are you doing? So that to me is a serious concern. And I think, for the folks who are maybe feeling a little left behind right now, my encouragement to you is stay connected, stay focused, stay integrated into some of these changes so that you can make steps to not fall so far behind. But to those of you, and this is where maybe I would put myself, and part of why I do a lot of this stuff is for those who maybe are on the front end of this, don't necessarily feel you have to slow down, but be putting time and attention and thought into how do we not leave everybody behind? And that may sound counterproductive. That may sound like, well, I've just got to watch out for me. But forget the fact that I'm coming from a biblical worldview where I would just say that's just wrong on so many levels, to just say I'm out for me and I don't care the impact it has on anybody else. But I've seen firsthand, just societally and in even organizational performance, it doesn't end well. And it's these short-term gains that you may get that leave you with long, sometimes irreversible pains that become 1,000 times harder to work through. And so, yeah, sometimes then people are like, whatever, by then I'll have moved on to something else. Don't be that person. What a miserable existence to be that person. And I just have, especially growing up in a funeral home, I've known plenty of people who that they were that person and they got to the end and it wasn't worth it. And so I hope to encourage people, who may be on that cutting edge going, I'm just out for me. I just am going to stay ahead. And you know what? If some people got to break a few eggs to make an omelet, it's not a good look on you and it's not helpful to people. And I would challenge you to think differently about it. And not only just from a moral, ethical standpoint, that's not okay. We need to treat people like they're equals and that they're valuable. And we need to bring them along for the ride, not just for what we can get out of them, but because they're valuable human beings that we should be caring for. But also, I've seen the consequences of this play out, and you will lose. At some point, you will lose. You may feel like you're winning. You may feel like you're just going to keep winning, but you won't. And even in those phases where you feel like you're winning, you are going to be feeling so much pressure to just constantly have to stay up there. I've seen it take people out, and it's a miserable existence. And I've known enough people who've been there that have come back from it and gone, it actually wasn't worth it. So you may not listen to me and change your mind on it, but I hope you do, not only for your own good, but for the good of everybody else. And so I think I'm going to end with this one, because I think this is a more serious one that we do need to be really watching out for. And as we make this progress and as we move forward from a technological standpoint, we need to be watching out for those who potentially will be left behind, and not just for their good, which we should, because that's the right thing to do, but also for your own, so that you don't end up a miserable disaster in the end that, yeah, you got wherever you think you got, and what's it all worth? Nothing, because you can't take it with you. That's the thing. Can't take it with you when you go. So whatever progress you make, it's all going to be left. And that's not the legacy you want to leave. So with that, sorry to leave you on a heavier note, but I hope it challenges and encourages people, because I think there's work we can do on both ends of the spectrum to address this legitimate risk that Larry and Dr. Mukamala are bringing up, which is some real economic disruption we're going to experience. And if we're not careful, we're going to leave behind a lot of vulnerable people. And that's not good for anybody, period. And so let's just not do that. And I think we can do better. So with that, I hope you have a great rest of your Friday. Hope you have a great week, and we will see you on the other side.